I think by the end of this video, you may not want to call yourself black. Okay, all right. So before we get started, I just want to make something very clear. This is not a video that's going to encourage you to get skin bleach, to lighten your skin, or to put blonde in your hair, or move to the whitest part of the country or anything like that. No, we're not talking about that at all. Instead, what we're looking at are the descriptors that have been placed on us, and we're going to look at the limitations that come with those descriptors. And you're going to see this applies to multiple things just all throughout our world, all throughout society or whatever. But we're going to be focusing specifically on how we were called black. And even if you're somebody that says, hey, listen, I don't call myself black, I'm a native. I'm a native to this land. I'm an Aboriginal person, or I'm a Hebrew Israelite, or I'm a Christian, or whatever. All of these titles, as you're going to see in this video, do come with their limitations. And so we're going to look at quantum physics to kind of get a better understanding of, what's actually happening here when we embrace different titles for ourselves. Now, as we're getting into this, I want to make something very clear. I recently have just started learning about quantum physics. Now, I'm not setting myself up to be some kind of expert, at least not yet, in quantum physics. I'm just learning the basics. I'm learning the basic principles of quantum physics, and that is all we're looking at in this video. But what I'm learning is, even in those basic things, it's giving some very clear definitions or explanations to some of these things that I know for myself, I have been wondering for a very long time, and it's making it a lot clearer. And hopefully in this video, you'll see that as well. And so let's go ahead and hit it. Okay, so the best place to start, I believe, here is we're going to start with what is quantum physics, right? And we're going to look at this cartoon. Yeah, I found a cartoon. Hopefully YouTube won't give me any problems with this. Okay, so this is a good entry point into understanding what quantum physics is, and and just how you need to start thinking when you're getting into this particular topic here. So what I'm gonna do is, let me go ahead and show you that video, and at the end of the video, we're going to add another layer to it, and then we're going to get into the meat of this video.
And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous double-slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So, when we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So, they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. Physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. It was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange, never world of quantum events. What is matter? Marbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
So I hope that explains it for you. You know, if you're missing it, that's okay, because I think later on you'll get the gist of what this video is, what we're trying to communicate in this video here. So basically, you're dealing with this electron that only when observed, it starts off with all these different possibilities of where it could go. You know, it could go in one slit, it can go in the other slit, or it can hit, you know, the part there is no slit and just go into infinity or whatever. And so it starts off with all these possibilities, but then when those slits are injected there, it actually captures this wave format, right? But only when you observe it, it's almost as if these electrons know it's being observed. And when you look at the end result, you're just seeing it's defined. It's captured in that one moment of just the two slits. And so when you observe, when these electrons are being observed, and they're captured in that definitive moment, it's referred to as waveform collapse, meaning that think of what you call like a waveform. Think of like a sine wave, right? And on the sine wave, you got all these dots on there, right? And all those dots represents different measurements. They represent different possibilities, right? And then let's say we pick one. Once you pick one, you're like, I want that one up there. You pick that one, then what happens? All those possibilities, they collapse into that one, and then that's it. Meaning that all those other possibilities, they're gone. They just, now everything is singular. Now let's think of our brains, for example. You have in your brain, you have all of these. You wake up in the morning, right? And you're thinking about all these different things you can do. I want to go to an amusement park. I want to go camping. I want to go fishing. I want to go hiking. I want to go baking or whatever it is. So you start off your day with all these different possibilities of things that you could do. But then you decide based on whatever, say, you know what, I'm just going to pick one. And then once you pick that one, that's it. All those other possibilities that's floating around in your brain, they just kind of dissipate until the next time when you go back into that pool of ideas, then once again, you're going fishing again. So that's a very rough way of describing how quantum physics, how it sees the world, is looking at the world at a very small, tiny measurement. When we're talking about electrons, we're talking things that are extremely small. But the question is, and this is a question that, scientists are still weighing out and debating, is there a relation between that small, tiny world of electrons and our world, because we're a lot more definitive. We're much larger, obviously, than electrons. Is there a connection between that? And that's what we're going to explore in this video. Okay, so recently, I guess I've been thinking about this for some time, this topic for a little bit. But this video that I'm about to show you right now, it really got me thinking, about this, quantum physics thing and how it relates to blackness and all of that. But I think this news story is a good example of where we're going to go with this on our journey here. Okay, so this news story comes to us out of Lincoln Heights, Ohio, and it's talking about a story of a black community there that decided to arm up because of some threats that they were perceiving. So let's play the news story here, and then we're going to get even further with this. Okay, all right, let's go.
Turn now to one community in Ohio, which is now the center of a growing national debate about civil rights, hate speech, and the Second Amendment. NBC News correspondent and NBC News Now daily anchor Morgan Radford visited the town of Lincoln Heights, where residents have formed an armed community defense group in the wake of a neo-Nazi rally. Morgan joins us now. You were there just on Tuesday. What did the residents tell you about what's going on?
Yeah, I was there just this week. John, it was fascinating because what's interesting is that this town was founded during the Great Migration back in the 1920s as a refuge for black citizens, which is why it was especially painful when neo-Nazis suddenly appeared in this 3,000-person majority black town. But they decided to fight back, taking up arms and patrolling their own streets. Now they're at the center of a much larger debate about protection and free speech and who gets it.
These aren't police officers or soldiers.
We're business owners, we're fathers, we're sons, daughters.
These are civilians, members of the Lincoln Heights Safety and Watch program.
It's a duty. Okay, let's go.
The duty, protecting their neighborhood, the majority black village of Lincoln Heights, Ohio.
Ain't nobody scared of you.
After neo-Nazis held a rally here last month, carrying rifles, waving swastikas, and hurling racial slurs, just moments before children were let out of school. At the time, law enforcement officials said the neo-Nazis did not break any laws, but an investigation by county prosecutors is ongoing. Weeks later, the KKK came with these flyers.
First African-American community above the Mason-Dixon line of staff.
Safety and Watch Group spokesperson Durrance Daniels says the police did not do enough, which was more chilling because the town was founded in the 1920s as a safe haven for black residents.
Lincoln Heights is our home. If somebody broke into your home, you call the police, and the police says, if they do it again, we haven't broken any law, so we're just going to allow them to break into your home again. What would you do?
Are you worried at all that having a potentially armed response could just create more friction, create more danger?
I'll answer that by saying I've never felt safer as a black man in my community than I have right now.
The mayor of Evendale, which oversees the police force that responded that day, said in a statement to NBC News, "Our emphasis on de-escalation and public safety resulted in the incident's resolution without injuries to any of the persons involved." But residents here say they can't afford to wait. Every day, the Safety and Watch group escorts children to school and patrols the streets.
Why do you all wear masks?
Those Nazis, we have reports of them finding our backgrounds, so we're not hiding ourselves from the residents, but we're protecting our family from what we're doing out here.
While many locals do support the security group, some, like business owner Eric Ruffin, say,
I think I can stop there with that, and you kind of get the idea of the story. So here you have a family, or rather a group of people, black people in this town of Lincoln Heights, Ohio, who, because of this incident or incidents that took place where you had this neo-Nazi group, and then I guess you had the KKK or whatever show up not that far from there, they felt threatened, and understandably so. And so, grabbing onto their rights as American citizens, they said, we're going to arm ourselves and to make sure that our communities are protected. That makes perfect sense. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. But here is where we have to engage a little bit more in this story to really understand and get an idea of the much bigger picture. So I asked myself, I said, okay, just out of curiosity, what are the existing crime rates in Lincoln Heights? I'm just very curious about that. Well, I did a little searching around, and I came across this page. It's called crimegrade.org, and they actually give them a grade F when it comes to crime. And again, this is just one source, but, and I'll tell you in a moment some of the other things I came across as well. But as you can see here, I know it shades when I put my mouse over it, but just right here in the middle, that's Lincoln Heights. The red part is what's considered more dangerous. It's a higher crime rate. And then as you get to the dark green or the mid green, the crime goes down. And when I looked at some of these other areas, another town not that far from here, the crime was significantly down as well. And so it goes through it and it kind of explains to you as well. So crime, from what I can see when I look through it, it's higher. It's higher. It's not like, what you would see like in a Chicago or, New York City or whatever, but it is substantial enough. And I was able to find, some news stories, over the years too, of different murders and shootings and stuff that has taken place in this town. So this town isn't necessarily known to be, one that's crime free, and they're not familiar with it at all. And I'm just kind of paging through some of this stuff for you so you can kind of see, some of the things that, that goes on in that area. And like I said, based on, again, and I stress this, not saying that it's crime like all over the place. It doesn't seem like that, but it does seem like it is a problem in Lincoln Heights. So my question was, looking at that story, understanding why they're doing that, their reaction, and patrolling the streets and all of that. But at the same time, on the other side, looking at there is a systemic problem with crime in that city already. I'm thinking, okay, were you guys arming up before the KKK or the neo-Nazis showed up to take care of these people that look like you that are already doing stuff? And so, I don't, the answer probably to that is more than likely no, because this happens quite often, and so it was that particular trend that I wanted to focus on this video. And we're going to see in a moment here, I'm going to show you a little thought experiment that I ran with just to kind of make this a little clearer on where I'm going with this. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. So what I did was decided to put together this thought experiment and run it through ChatGPT. All right. And you're going to see there's going to be some reading in this. OK, so don't tune out at this point, because I really need your attention on this one, because this is where it's all going to come together here. OK. All right. So what I did was I just put some some different things in there, but the narrative is going to be one that is very familiar. You're going to be very familiar with this narrative here as I'm reading through this. I just changed the characters a little bit. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Okay. I said, when you're doing a search in ChatGPT or Grok or any other LLM, you have to first define it. It's always helpful to define it and say, hey, listen, this is the mode I want you to operate in. In this case, I wanted it to operate as an expert social engineer, psychologist, a behavior scientist, and a quantum and mechanical physicist. Okay. And that's what I wanted to think in those terms. Okay. All right. So what I did, this is my thought experiment. I said, okay, here's another thought experiment. Birds come in all colors, but let's focus on the ones that have shades of green. Now, all birds have their own unique preferred habitat, practices, and etc. And so I said, so a man comes into a forest and begins to capture only the birds that have shades of green. He then goes to the forest forest after forest all over the world to do the same thing. Once he has captured all these different birds with different shades of green, he decides to call them green birds. Now, over the next few years, he trains them to function as quote unquote green birds, giving them the same food, same migration patterns, same mating practices, etc. Not only that, they notice that they are treated poorly when compared to all the other birds. Most importantly, it is reinforced to them that blackbirds are the enemy because it was blackbirds who are really responsible for their reconditioning. I hope you're picking up on the narrative at this point here. Okay. Remember, like I said, I'm just swapping things around here. Anytime it is perceived that blackbirds are doing something to harm them, they will quickly formulate into one unit to defend themselves. However, when other birds attack, even other green birds attack each other. It is not treated with the same level of urgency. I'm trying to figure out something. I'm trying to figure out if somehow this scenario plays into waveform collapse because a singular identification has been determined for the green birds, who again originally came from diverse backgrounds. They are by default ignoring the fact that an attack is an attack, regardless if it comes from blackbirds or green birds. And then I just said, I would love to hear your perspective on that. Okay. So here we go. Here's the breakdown here of what it gave us. Okay. And I thought this was interesting. It just said that your scenario beautifully demonstrates social conditioning through selective categorization. The man, an authority, imposes an arbitrary but powerful classification, green birds, thus overriding each bird's original identity. By standardizing their diet, behavior, and habitat, he's essentially erasing their previous individuality and cultural diversity. Now, again, this reminds us a lot of what's called today, black folks, what we're called today. This is what happened to us. We were being snatched from all places, every place, in various parts of the continent. We were being snatched to be put into, basically, think of a bin, and now you're black. It didn't matter if you were from Congo. It didn't matter if you were from Nigeria. It didn't matter if you was from Angola. It didn't matter. None of those things mattered. It just, now you're black. And that's what happened, right? So all those different cultures, they have their own practices. They have their own, ways of thinking, their ways of building, their ways of cooking, all of that stuff. They all have their own individual kind of uniqueness, right? So anyway, let's continue. This aligns directly with psychological conditioning, Pavlovian, classical, and operant conditioning. Operant conditioning, the birds are rewarded or punished based on conforming to their new identity. Poor treatment alongside reinforcement or negative stereotypes. Blackbirds as enemies cements group behavior based purely on arbitrary color categorization. And then the second point was in-group or out-group bias. The green birds unify strongly against externally defined threat. Blackbirds, but fail to recognize threats within their own imposed identity as significant because internal conflicts is normalized through conditioning. Okay, there you go. Let's move on. From behavior science and group dynamics, your scenario reflects the minimum group paradigm where arbitrary categorization alone, even without inherent connections between individuals, creates strong group identities. First point is minimum group paradigm. Individuals grouped on arbitrary criteria quickly develop biases favoring their own group. We see this all the time when we're talking about our own, right? Groupthink and collective behavior. They act decisively against perceived external threats, blackbirds, but show diminished urgency against internal violence due to cognitive dissonance, normalization, and rationalization. Now we're looking at it from a quantum physics or waveform collapse, right? Waveform collapse refers to a quantum system existing in multiple states or probabilities simultaneously until observed, at which point it collapses into a definitive state. Metaphorically, before being categorized, each bird's identity, behaviors, and associations are a vast range of potentials or wave functions. And again, when we look at our DNA, if you ever look at a DNA chart, you know, if you ever got your DNA checked out by one of these platforms out here, it will show you like, okay, you're 5% this, 3% this, 20% that, or whatever. Just think of that, of all the different possibilities of different, that's all within you. You know, just think of it that way. Before being captured, each bird had various behavior potentials, but after being categorized as green birds, their possibilities became significantly narrow, limiting full range of potential outcomes. From quantum physics, waveform collapse, and entanglement analogy. Your scenario metaphorically aligns with waveform collapse. Waveform collapse, quantum entities exist in multiple states of simultaneously until observation defines their state. Think of it as like if you take a coin and you flip it, right? When you flip a coin, if you was to play it in slow motion, or better yet, like if, not necessarily in slow motion, well, maybe in slow motion. When when that coin, as it's flipping and it's going like that, all those different points represents a different possibility, right? That's what, and then once it lands, that means it's a waveform collapse, right? That's what it's talking about. The selective grouping of birds can be metaphorically seen as observing and collapsing their potential identities into one measurable state, being a green bird. Quantum entanglement metaphor. Green birds are previously separate and distinct entities with unique behavior patterns and habitats become entangled in their identity as green birds. Changes affecting one perceived threats from blackbirds immediately influence the collective, while other threats are not similarly entangled or collapsed states differently. Let's go on here from behavior science. Let's see, confirmation bias. Birds interpret any negative interaction from blackbirds as confirmation of their conditioning, reinforcing prejudice behavior patterns. Cognitive dissonance. When harm originates internally, green on green violence, it's psychologically easier to dismiss or rationalize due to discomfort acknowledging internal threats as real threats, thus reducing urgency. Wow, that's a lot there. Let's see. Mechanical systems, from mechanical systems analogy. Feedback loops. By conditioning birds to react strongly against blackbirds, you establish a negative feedback loop. Action, reaction, reinforcement, increasing stability in behavior against perceived external threats. However, internally, feedback loops remain weaker, allowing instability or chaos, internal violence to persist without urgent correction. Wow. And then this last piece here, let's see. I wanted to see if I wanted to read all this. Integrative analysis and waveform collapse connection, putting it all together. Initial condition, quantum superposition. Birds initially exist with diverse behaviors and no predefined group associations. Okay, so again, these birds, they were from all over, right? They had all these different possibilities of what they could be in their own cultures, right? And then once this man comes around and he's like, Oh no, I'm just going after, I want all the green birds. So if you got green on your head, you're going in my bag. If you got green on your wing, you're going in my bag. If you got green on your beak, you're going in my bag. That is what's called waveform collapse. He's knocking out all those potentials and collapsing it, making them act as a singular, right? That's what's basically what's happening there. And then it goes through conditioning, resulting bias. That's where behavior science comes in. And then the quantum analogy. That's what we were just talking about there. Okay, so that's pretty much everything there. Now, let's kind of wrap it all together here, just for our conversation on how it pertains to us as black folks, right? So this is exactly, we're talking about birds in that scenario, but this is exactly what happened to us in our history, right? We came from these different backgrounds, which had different potentials and different things, like I said earlier. And then it wasn't until Europeans or these external forces came in and said, we don't care. We don't care about all of that. You are now going to be defined as such. You're going to be defined as this. And we're going to condition you to, to think in this way. When it comes to your food, when it comes to who you perceive as your enemy, who you perceive as your friend, what God you worship, the whole nine, we were reconditioned, right? And so when that happened, this is what we have today. Now let's connect it to that news story that I just shared with you. So now hopefully you understand a little bit better. Here you have this town that is very familiar with violence, in their own community. However, that violence, because of their conditioning, they have been conditioned to put that almost as a secondary, and then primary go after the blackbirds. Well, in real life, we're talking, and the blackbirds represents the what you call it, the Nazis and the KKK and all of that. So the thing I want you to really focus on is this. When they called us black or Negro or whatever, this is something I've said on this platform repeatedly. What you name, you control. What you name, you control. This is something that you should always remember this, because I want to take it back even further than that, when what we've been talking about here. In your culture, you are defined. That culture has its barriers. It has its boundaries. And there are things that you're able to do and accomplish within that culture. And there's going to be certain things you're not going to be able to accomplish in that culture, because the culture is like, that's too much. No, we don't do that here. But does it mean that you're not able to do it? Does it mean that you don't have the ability to do those things? No, because you very much have those abilities. Think of America, like America, you have what they call the melting pot, right? And America, the storyline of America is basically come to America because you can be whatever you want to be. The storyline of America is you got people coming from all over, from these different cultures that have limitations on what they can be as individuals. Once you come to America, I mean, it's all open. You can be whatever you want to be. There's no limitations at all. And that's the storyline. So think of it along those lines. And so your culture, even your culture, whatever your culture may be, you want to claim to be, if you want to hold on to your blackness, just know blackness in of itself is going to have its own limitations. Look at politics, for example. Look at the black politicians. Black politicians by nature are limited. If you operate as a black politician, you are going to be limited. You are not going to get reparations. I mean, as long as you think in that way, as long as you accept that descriptor that has been given to you, you will be limited, period. If you think as a black engineer, you're always going to be limited by, well, instead of you being the best engineer, you're going to be limited in this system, because when people hear black engineer, they're automatically going to assume that you need help. They're automatically going to assume that you're an other, you're different, you don't belong in this room. And so a lot of times what black people like to do is that we want to hold on to that and force our way into some of these spaces here that ultimately they're like, okay, just come on in. but they still treat you like a Tiny Tim, got you in a separate chair somewhere where, you know, you're still perceived as a less than. And then let's see what else. You know, so anytime, you put this cloak on of blackness, that's what's happening. You are limiting who you truly can be. All these different possibilities on that wave chart of what's really inside of you, it's limited. It's limitless on what you can be. You can be almost anything you want. I mean, there are limitations, obviously, to, you know, maybe our, you know, how we're built physically, or, you know, there's certain limitations out there, but this right here is limitless. And whatever you pretty much put your mind to, for the most part, you can move in that direction. You may not be the top of the game in that area, whatever it is that you're trying to do, but it certainly doesn't mean you can't do it. And so what I'm saying to you is, when you accept these roles that have been given to you by this matrix system, just know these roles are designed to keep you in a controlled box. So even if you call yourself, let's say, a Christian, or if you call yourself, because if you call yourself a Christian, or if you call yourself a Hebrew, then you're going to be limited by the book that they came up with and gave to you. You're not going to be able to explore anything beyond that. I mean, you can try, you can do it, but you're still going to be, you're limiting yourself on the potential and the possibilities of who you can become and what you can become. And so that's the whole point of this thought experiment in this video here, is to really kind of go through that and show you, just, man, when I was sitting back and just learning some of this stuff, I was like, wow, that now I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to get it now. You know, and the limitations that oftentimes we put on ourselves. We like to say, I'm black and I'm proud and all of that. That is not to say, again, and I emphasize, I'm not saying ignore the path that got you to this point. Like, anybody on this platform knows that when it comes to tracing our history and going back to our history here on this continent and looking at our history in Africa or in the Caribbean and all that stuff, I'm always going to do that because those things are important. However, I will never limit myself to those things, because I'm a lot more than that. And you are a lot more than that. But as long as you hold on to these narratives and descriptors that they give you, you will always be limiting yourself. So that's what I'm talking about. That I said at the end of this video, you may not want to call yourself black anymore. You know, so now hopefully you understand and you get where I was getting at with this video. So I hope you guys got something out of this. Thank you so much for tuning in. You take care, and I'll see you again soon.